So I feel among some pretty distinguished authors here. I feel so grateful every time I recognize the talent that we have in Lake County. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. The Call of the Wild, so if any of you know my story, you know that I lived 10 years in the woodlands, the oak woodlands in Lake County here. Chop wood, carry water. So I lived 10 years off the grid with no running water, no indoor plumbing, and you couldn't drive to the cabin. It was a single room cabin, 16 by 16 square was it, with a little loft. And you couldn't drive there. So I had to hike about a quarter of a mile each way up a hill to get to the cabin. And I was fortunate enough to have a dog at that time when I lived this lifestyle. And she was with me up there the whole time until about 4 years ago. Well, probably about 5 years ago, I recognized there was going to come a point in her life when she wouldn't be able to make the hike up to the cabin anymore. And so I knew it was time to find a new home for both of us. Plus it was getting hard to try to, I didn't chop the wood, I chainsawed the wood. But I still had to carry everything up to the cabin that I consumed. And it was getting hard to find felled wood out in the forest and then hike that up to the cabin. So it was time. So shortly after Shyla, who was 15 at the time that she passed, shortly after she passed, I wrote a book. Because what I recognized is that I had created this container that was able to companion me through the most difficult situation in my life so far, and that was losing my canine companion and my spiritual buddy, Shyla. So in looking at the Call of the Wild, recognizing how much I gained from living the life that I lived with her and what she taught me, it's just never ending. It's never ending, the gift that I've gotten from living with her. The other dog that you saw here is Greta. I finally, after 4 years since Shyla passed, I finally had the nerve to try again with another dog. And she's a rescue from Southern California, has some behavioral issues, at least with other dogs, as you noticed if you got a chance to see her interacting. But what I wanted to do was read a little bit of my introduction, because that's where I actually talk about Shyla and the motivating factor of what drew me to write the book. And the book is called Companioning the Sacred Journey, a guide to creating a compassionate container for your spiritual practice. So I'm a mindfulness teacher, and I try to help people learn how to create this compassionate container to help us through the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows that happen in every human's life. So this was the beginning of those teachings. So the way I wrote this is, some of it is about the scenery and what's happening in the moment, and some of it is kind of a flashback of what was happening. So it's hard to hear, it's hard to see how it was written, to hear it by word, because some of it's italicized and it's a reflection, and some of it is present day. So I'll try to distinguish that for you so that you can follow along. And again, this happened in the hills of Lake County outside of Spring Valley, out by the Double Eagle Ranch, so kind of the driest part of the county. The oaks are almost bare. The remaining leaves dangle in the fall wind, dry and crackly. Shyla pauses and stillness takes over. I follow her lead, as I've done literally thousands of times throughout the 10 years we've spent living remotely at the cabin. She scans the canyon laid out before us. Every time we come down the hill, she does this. She does it with the time and attention one would either use the first time seeing the view, or possibly knowing it would be the last. This was her last. Not that we knew it then, but we knew it. We were making a final trip up the hill to clean the cabin and retrieve some remaining belongings, mainly a couple of solid wood and green leather dining chairs found free alongside the road during our second year living there. We wheelbarrowed those and other miscellaneous items that we needed for our next adventure together, our new home on Cobb Mountain. As Shyla descends the glorified deer trail, she is unable to move her hind legs in full sign of her age. Instead, she leads with her front legs, and her back ones kind of hop to catch up.
Sorry, I haven't read this in a while.
It's hard to tell if she's in pain, but since they can't move fully, I assume she's experiencing some discomfort at the very least. Up the next slope, she pauses again, this time by the overlook to our benefactor's monument. I reflect on our friend Walter, who had offered us the cabin, as a home when the end of a 13-year relationship found us homeless. The Tibetan prayer flags flap gently in the breeze, and a wooden striker twists and turns, tenderly tinkling the long metal rods on an aging set of chimes. Shyla again scans the scenery. Over the years, Shyla's growing consciousness continued to amaze and inspire me. As we had settled into the cabin in our voluntary, simplistic lifestyle, her presence and awareness grew to like that of a seasoned monk, intentional, in the moment, and bright. Our relationship with Walter was one of spiritual companions on the path. While he had passed a few years before, connecting with him was as easy as pausing momentarily and bringing him to mind. Voila, his consciousness was with us, and sometimes Shyla would react as if he were there, with a skittish concern and distancing that reflected her relationship with him while he was alive. We spent many mornings and late afternoons at his monument space, an oak tree's low, reaching arms stretched above and around the stone-cast Buddha statue placed in his memory by his family. His ashes tucked close behind in a simple plastic container with various colorful silk scarves draped over it. A sacred space was created. The usual altar accoutrements, candles, incense, and vases are farther behind, protected from the elements by the muscular oak. A lit candle, some billowing incense, an offering of fruit, and one of Shyla's biscuits in the offering bowl was our usual alms at this site, which was the site where Walter camped some 30 years prior. It was fitting that this be his final resting place. He so loved the land, this land where he lived with family and ultimately in solitude until his final year. I would sit here and meditate, facing out towards the canyon, aside the Buddha, and Shyla would put her back to me, looking up the hill, as was common when we were outside together. She would usually take a view that could oversee everything, and if she could, she would tuck herself into a spot where she was protected from behind. She was always on alert when we were outside together. Her shepherd nature, I thought. Always protective and aware of my whereabouts, whether I was cutting and gathering wood, sitting and meditating, practicing qigong, or eating. Shyla was my companion, spiritual, physical, emotional. One morning in meditation, about a month after she had passed, I saw Shyla's life in metaphor, a petal in the blooming flower of life, a soul in the awakening consciousness. Still part of the whole awakening, but an individual petal that grows and falls of its own accord, living within the limits of the laws of nature. My life too, of course, I am but one petal on the flower of awakening. The importance in playing my role in the blossoming is to be as present with the whole process as I can, as well to bloom and be part of the bigger blossom in the most magnificent way I can. It is also to accept the eventual aging and dying of not only other petals, but inevitably myself. My intention is to do this gracefully. Shyla is a petal that has blossomed and fallen gracefully for me and before me. She not only gave me the gift of her life and companionship, but I also had the gift of her death, literally in my arms, as conscious and incredulous as all that can be. I think that's all I'll read out of that, just because the rest of it is more about the bigger picture of those petals coming into blossom and passing away. So, interestingly enough, in the Rocky Fire, that cabin burned down. And as I was writing about it in my blog, I was waiting to do the last in the series of losing the cabin. I had already moved. I live up on Cobb. I lived up there for about a year, or two or so years already, when the Rocky Fire came. And we were out hiking on the north coast when the Valley Fire broke out. And I didn't know if my home still stood because I lived on Cobb. And I realized that I needed to get in and write that final blog before I had this next adventure to write about. So what it reminds me of in The Call of the Wild was just this adventure after adventure that Buck went on. So many different ways to be in gratitude and to live and to find out who we are, you know, and that's what I'm finding with life and with my journeys and with my writing as well. So I appreciate the opportunity that I had with Shyla for those 15 years, and now with Greta being the rescue that she is. And I will always have an affinity and a connectedness with the canine consciousness that I can't verbalize. But I know that other people that have that connection with canines get it. They get the communication that can happen that's not human and it's not verbal. And I am so grateful for that, and so grateful for the opportunity that I never would have chosen for myself. I never would have picked living out in the middle of nowhere for 10 years, but by year 2, when I started living it, I was hooked. And voluntary simplicity was just something that I'm so deeply, deeply grateful for all the circumstances that brought me to that. So again, grateful to be part of this. Thank you so much for being able to be amongst my fellow authors up here.